The simple short answer is because purely incremental improvements and incremental moves don't move the needle relative to actually creating enterprise value. That's the real short answer. It only comes from taking calculated risks, and companies need to take more calculated risks. But what naturally happens, especially as companies are successful, as they scale, they start playing more defense than offense.
Hey guys, welcome to another episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. Today we have a very, very special guest, a former Amazon executive, a digital strategist, an author of hopefully 2 best-selling books, The Amazon Way and one of my new favorite books, Big Bet Leadership. John is a renowned expert in leading innovation, digital transformation, and operational excellence. He had a huge role in scaling Amazon's third-party marketplace, and he now helps companies leverage Amazon's leadership principles to achieve long-lasting success and some great innovation. John, thank you so much for being here. Welcome to the show.
Avitas, thanks for having me on the Tech Leader Playbook.
Yes, John, first of all, thank you for sending me your awesome book. I think I told you right off the bat it was a very technical book, and it was not an easy read, but it was a damn good read. I highly recommend it to folks. Right? I mean, it was like a playbook.
And when you say technical, you don't mean technology. It's specific and prescriptive in terms of here's a problem somebody tends to face when driving a big transformation. Here's a strategy to approach it. And then here's a mechanism to help manifest that strategy. And so in that way, it's specific, it's technical.
For me, it was just-in-time reading, John, because
nice.
We're constantly trying. I'm big on innovation, but it's very important to know where to put your energy, right? Especially in a tough economy, recession-like vibe, and where do you spend your time, right? That's very important. But,
Well, I mean, that gets to the power of a well-written book, right? Versus reading a blog or something like that. The density, the condensed knowledge and expertise that's in a well-written book has a power curve of 1,000 to 1, and everything, right? You think about the time that it took to develop that expertise, the time it took to write and publish the book, it versus the value somebody can get out of it, like yourself, who's actually okay, how do I dissect it and put it to work? It's 10,000 to 1, right? And that's why I like the platform of writing books, because of the ability to impact a greater scale of people and businesses.
Huge. John, you've had an incredible career working with some influential companies, specifically Amazon. Share a little bit about your journey. And I don't know how big Amazon was when you joined and how big they were when you left, but tell me a little bit about that scale and the awkwardness of that scale and how you kind of navigated and led a lot of that.
Yeah, so I've worked in both a lot of large companies and served a lot of large companies, and I've worked in and served a lot of small companies, and some highlights and a lot of lowlights, and everything, right? But you learn throughout all of them. And so I was an early young partner at Arthur Andersen. I was then an executive at a data integration startup company in kind of the go-go years of the dot-com era, and it was a bust. And in 2001, a former colleague of mine from Arthur Andersen, who was then a director of finance at Amazon, he called me up and he goes, "John, you should come talk to us about something we're thinking about." And so it was great. I, could kind of see the wind down on Commerce Route coming, which was the technology company. And so I interviewed over 3 months, over 23 times at Amazon. And most of them were really, it was like a consulting project. I was helping to stitch together what the right goals, strategy, plan would be for a marketplace business. So I joined in early 2002 to play a key role in launching the marketplace business. So that's third-party selling at Amazon.com. Today, that's almost 60% of all units shipped and sold, over 3 million sellers. It's one of those businesses that's so successful, it gets Amazon in a bunch of, anti-competitive problems and everything. But, if we could
all be your fault.
If we could all be so lucky, exactly. If we could all be so lucky as to have accused monopoly powers. To put it in context, so today Amazon is a roughly $600 billion revenue company. Fourth quarter of 2002, when we launched the marketplace business, Amazon had its first $1 billion quarter. And so we were roughly a $3.3 billion revenue business. But it was a fascinating time at Amazon because we were figuring out, oh, we're not just a retailer. We're a technology company whose first business was direct first-party retail. But we are also, what we like doing is building services and platform capabilities that other people use. And the marketplace business was the first of the successful platform strategies that Amazon has undertaken. The second thing that was really interesting was we were figuring out like how we worked together, how we held each other accountable, how we made decisions together, how we prioritize, how we would think through things. And those became the Amazon leadership principles. I left Amazon in late 2005. I was then a partner for 12 years at a really good mid-market management consulting firm called Alvarez & Marsal. I started to put all those little mechanisms, strategies and plays and principles to work with my clients to help make change happen. And it was several years after I left Amazon that one of my clients at the Gates Foundation came to me and he goes, John, you do a nice job of delicately putting those in play. You should write a book about that. And so I listened to him. I heard the signal, right? So I released the first edition of a book called The Amazon Way, which is about Amazon's leadership principles in 2014. We've done 3 editions of that book. It's been translated into 13 languages, sold hundreds of thousands of copies. That was a self-published book, by the way. Pretty crazy story in some ways. But what I started to see was the impact of how Amazon thought through things and how they tried to be better. Not that they're perfect in any way, but how deliberate they were about their culture and their leadership. And I've taken a lot of inspiration, obviously, from that. So this recent book called Big Bet Leadership, Your Transformation Playbook for Winning in the Hyper-Digital Era. In one way, that's the culmination of all the work I've done since Amazon in putting this playbook to work. I got to serve as the Senior Innovation Advisor at T-Mobile for 3 years. We built a new business incubation capability process at T-Mobile. My client there, Kevin McCaffrey, who's the co-author of Big Bet Leadership, was my key client. And what we did was we adapted a lot of the Amazon approaches, plus some others, to create an innovation approach for T-Mobile. A couple of years ago, I was thinking about what's next? And what I came to was that what every company is struggling with is how do you create significant upside value, alpha, actually, differentiation, but do it in a way that's safe to let it do what these things are going to do, which is that you're going to iterate on these things, right? We're going to fail on them and everything. And there's a set of things that senior leadership get right in doing this, and there's a whole lot of things that senior leaders get wrong in doing it. And so that's the purpose of the book, which is to help senior leaders do an incredibly important and growing in importance part of their job, which is to seek high upside, high risk opportunities to grow their business and to proceed on them in a way that allows everybody to succeed relative to those things. And that's what Big Bet Leadership is. So it's truly about agile leadership for high value, high risk situations.
Why do you think this is so critical, this big bet concept for leaders to embrace, and why should leaders embrace this kind of mindset almost?
The simple short answer is because purely incremental improvements and incremental moves don't move the needle relative to actually creating enterprise value. That's the real short answer. It only comes from taking calculated risks, and companies need to take more calculated risks. But what naturally happens, especially as companies are successful, as they scale, they start playing more defense than offense. And so this is a book to help remedy that, Warren Buffett calls it the ABCs of corporate decay, which is arrogance, bureaucracy, complacency. It helps battle the innovator's dilemma, which is kind of Clayton Christensen coined phenomena that companies that are successful in one era really struggle in reinventing themselves because they get locked into a model and new competition comes along. And that is the struggle that most, whether you're a small company, mid-sized company, or a large company, but if you're successful, you start playing more defense than offense, and you start accepting mediocrity relative to your growth, relative to your margin, relative to your customer experience, because you start managing more to a financial outcome than to the reason you started the business, which is to creatively serve customers. And so big bets are the only way in order to actually position your organization for long-term differentiation, competitive advantage, and alpha, which is, kind of above market norm competitive capability.
John, thank you for that. That's great. When I've seen sports teams start, when they're up by 20 and they start just playing not to lose, you see what happens. I mean, that lead shrinks and shrinks and shrinks. When they let loose and play as if the game is tied, it's another level of sports.
The analogy, it actually works. Like, it is a perfect analogy, which is when you playing to win is distinctly different than playing not to lose. Distinctly different in athletics, in your personal life, in your career, and in business. And organizations, the entire, like, whether it's the reward system, the way that you do planning, the way that you do budgeting, what it does is it puts a focus on short-term results, and you are rewarded for not missing incremental things versus winning over the long period of time. And so that set of forces naturally makes senior management more and more and more reluctant in actually being entrepreneurial and seeking new ways to serve new customers with new products and services.
I love it. John, I have actually a personal story on this. One of my business partner, Jeff, is a great guy, very smart, older and wiser than me. But when we were co-running the company, what ended up happening is his kind of need to not lose, his risk aversion was creating this very, like, sure, we could take risks as long as it's not risky, almost. And we were growing 3% a year, and it was just the most exhausting thing. And one day I said, look, I'm going to step in as the CEO, but I'm going to run this show. Obviously, all decisions go together, but we gotta step on it. And we had 2 years in a row where we hit like 285% growth and 235% growth, and it changed the landscape of our organization. And we made Inc. 5,000 2 times in a row and all this wonderful stuff. And even in this tough times, that growth has allowed us to hire great people to sustain us until we start growing again. So I agree with you wholeheartedly. We were playing not to lose, and it just wasn't working, right? It's like, well, we can just get better as we streamline systems. It's like, no, it doesn't work.
We're talking about just one side of the coin relative to this risk, right? Which is playing too conservative. The other side of the coin is a team, a company goes, great, we've got an idea and we're going for it. Well, guess what? Those fail the vast majority of the time. And the reason they fail because of a lot of reasons, but they fail primarily because we commit upfront to a vague idea and notion, and we don't seek clarity and allow that idea to iterate and get tuned and actually test out the high risk, high value assumptions or things that must be true, the hypotheses that you're making to make that so. So you've got a two-sided set of risks. On one hand, you do need to go for it, but on the other hand, you got to be really careful about how you go for it. And so big bet leadership, the mission of it is to seek the upside ambition while minimizing the downside risk. Great, John. How do you do that, right? Like, well, that's what the entire book is about. My co-author, Kevin McCaffrey, and I both worked for and discerned and have had careers in driving these high potential, high risk situations, which is what a big bet is, right? What we discerned is that these big bet legends, these like Jeff Bezos, John Ledger from T-Mobile, Elon Musk, Satya Nadella of Microsoft, like what they do differently than other really good operational leaders do. What they do on this piece to be systematically a growth creation and a differentiation and innovator is they do three things. They create clarity, they maintain velocity, and they accelerate risk and value. So the book is a playbook, so the tactics in order to do that. So again, the mission is seek out the upside while minimizing the downside. And that's the story of the book. So, we've all been in these projects or programs or strategies where, we do a kickoff like, yeah, we're going for it. But what quickly happens, right? We quickly start running the situation at a tone, tempo, and pace that is like any other project. You cannot allow true big bets to do that. So we have a whole set of remedies and constraints to help maintain or actually accelerate the velocity, especially in those early phases where what you're doing is you're testing out the feasibility, you're de-risking this thing early before you make big commitments.
I like that. One of my favorite parts, if I remember correctly, John, it's been a few months since I read the book, was creating a team to specifically find holes in your plan. That's very rare, right? Because we go up there, and especially if we're high level enough, the organization is like, what do I know? This is the boss, and he sounds awesome, and he's charismatic, but you almost have to de-risk it by getting people that are almost, what do you call it?
Devil's advocate.
Yeah, they're going to give you the other side, and you're like, oh, I didn't even think about that. I think we wait too long.
Creating a culture and a set of mechanisms that invites deep, clear thinking and invites skepticism and the ability to pressure test it. That is one of the most unique things to find in a company. And Amazon, I think, as far as I've experienced, is the one who's really figured out how to scale that approach of how to politely, but still specifically approach concepts, as in, like, one of the risks is you fall in love with the concept. One of the risks is you don't actually think it through. One of the risks is you don't actually pressure test, like, well, what's the real high risk assumptions, the things that must be true in order to make this true. So, one of the primary mechanisms that we talk about throughout the book is how to write and debate memos. Amazon calls that the working backwards process at Amazon. We reverse engineered and, from the ground up, devise a set of memos and approaches to help a team or a company that isn't Amazon, that doesn't have all this background, in order to do this. But all of it is about to make the thinking better. And the best experiments you can make are what I call a memo experiment, right? It's a thought experiment. Thinking through by writing out and debating with a colleague or colleagues who are actually going to lean into it, study it closely, and be willing to have active, respectful debate.
John, how do you balance, you talked about de-risking it, right? How do you balance that need to de-risk a project to overthinking it and falling into paralysis by analysis, and then you end up going, you're right, it's too risky, I'm not going to bet my career on this?
Or it slows down, right? Which again, velocity is so critical. So you're absolutely right, which is for every risk, there's a counter risk. And so if you de-risk on one side, you run the potential. So if like, hey, we need to think this through more, well, the counter risk is an analysis paralysis, right? And so the best ways to get both of those things done, we need to thoroughly think something through in terms of a risk-based articulation of, like, truly what are we doing and what are we solving for, while not facing analysis paralysis. So, like, the two things that we talk about in the book are, one is a small dedicated team that is the core group driving these concepts. And the second is putting time constraints on how long you let something percolate. And the entire second section is called the Big Bet Environment section. And it's all about how do you accomplish both of those things, the way you form the team, the types of policies you put around it, the type of technology or testing environment that you put away around it. One of my favorite chapters is called Championship Habits, and it's really about the team culture and the communication approach that you take on these big bets. Definitely help address this dual-sided aspect of, we need to think it through and test it, but we have to keep our velocity. We can't suffer from analysis paralysis. There is a path to do both of those things.
Amazing. You talked about, I think you were going to get to the innovation culture, right? What role do you think culture plays in enabling leaders and their teams to take bold but successful bets, right? Because that's important. How can leaders kind of foster that culture that encourages calculated risk taking?
Well, that's fundamentally why I frame this as a leadership book versus a culture book, right? Like the difference between leadership and culture is, I think, pretty fuzzy. Leadership sets culture. And so it's the way that leaders actually do their job that sets how culture works in an organization. So relative to these innovations and these high potential, high risk, you need to have a different leadership approach for that versus, other situations, your normal operating procedure. And that's why, leadership is a skill, and it's a skill to lead and guide others in pursuit of a specific mission, not just any mission or every mission. And so this mission is different. And so we give you an alternate leadership approach. So especially on these things, leadership is what sets culture. For example, if you set a leadership tone that says, like, we are going to be innovative, but if an innovation fails and you end up holding a team accountable, that sends a very large message. Now, it depends on why it failed, right? If it failed because we tested the idea, it just wasn't the idea, we followed the book, well, that should be celebrated on one hand. That team should be rewarded relative to that. But if it failed because the team didn't execute well, right? They were in the book, we talk about kind of drugstore cowboys, right? All hat, no cattle. If they were bureaucratic in their approach and they were vague in their thinking and they actually didn't have a sense of urgency around this and a set of accountability, well, then it failed because of the team execution. Well, in that case, they should be held accountable, right? It shouldn't be rewarded. So leaders have, again, for every issue, there's a flip side of the coin issue. So on that particular one, leaders got to be involved enough and understand the job they need to do so that they can properly discern, did we fail for the right reasons or did we fail because we executed poorly? One needs to be rewarded, one needs to never be allowable, and that's a subtle leadership game, but that absolutely sets culture within an organization.
From what I'm getting at, as a leader, you almost have to push your leaders, your folks, to take more risks, right? Because again, if the culture is take risks, but your ass is on the table, if you mess up, then they're gonna be paralyzed to do anything amazing, and they're always gonna take the safe route because that's what you're encouraging, basically, right?
And that's why the way you frame this and the way you communicate is so critical. So, for example, if as a senior leader you have this big idea and you communicate, we are committing to the revenue and to the budget relative to this situation, or do you communicate, we are committed to testing this concept out, and here's the journey that we're going to do to test it out? Well, that's a subtle but distinctly different tone of communication. On one hand, the team hears, oh man, we've committed to this big budget. We don't know if this is going to work. Well, they're going to retract. They're going to get tight. They're not going to play free and loose, and you're not going to attract the right talent for that and everything, right? Versus the other one, the team goes, yep, our job is to test this out. Great, we're going to be aggressive, and you're going to get better innovators relative to that situation. But that's just subtle tone of communication, and most really good operational leaders don't have the awareness to really tune their tone, which sets culture that makes all the difference in the world. These little signals, especially internally, are really, really vital.
John, one of the things you said is playing not to lose. It reminded me, I'm in a lot of pitch sessions for startups, and a lot of the questions asked by other investors, and they're very good question, is like, hey, John, what stops from Amazon squishing you like a bug and coming up with something. They're already looking at this. One of the things that I've learned over the years is Amazon's not like putting a 500-person team on every idea it has, right? You as a startup, if you've got the right velocity and the risk taking you're really competing against Google's project manager and one or two engineers, not Google, right, or Amazon. I think people make that mistake, and that's another why they get risk. They don't take risks because they're afraid. Well, who am I? Google can get this done in 2 weeks, but Google's got a team, so they don't lose and they can poke at this idea, right? So they're not necessarily going all in to try to make this their core product almost.
Yeah, so the small team concept, the accountable small team, the atomic small team concept is an important one in most of these organizations. Amazon calls it a 2-pizza team, and it is a small attack unit, a small accountable team. I do think that oftentimes startups over-index on if we had crazy success, would Amazon attack this? I think in general that's probably not a real early high risk thing to put on your testing plan or to really think through. There could be cases where that's wrong, but I've been in enough of these discussions what you got to focus on is the customer and what would delight your customer, what would actually get customers to switch over. Don't be quite as competitor focused. And Amazon's first leadership principle is about customer obsession. And I've learned so much about what being truly customer obsessed is about, both tactically and strategically. Strategically is what this whole discussion is about, is how do you serve a customer better? So we have a set of memos in the book, the what sucks memo, the outcome definition memo, that really helps you think through that customer need and that customer situation and the killer feature that is going to delight that customer. And if you can't articulate that tagline, that's the bigger issue in most situations versus Amazon reacting to you.
Sure. I really like that what sucks memo, because if you can't tell me what sucks with a customer, why are you even creating this? You might not even have
and we focused on kind of that strong pungent term, what sucks versus pain points or whatever, because it forces you to crystallize the real job the customer is trying to get done and what really sucks about it versus the little friction things. People complain about friction, but they don't switch because of friction. People will switch if you actually solve a real what sucks problem for them. And that's the mentality of why we framed it that way is there's lots of pain point out there, but being able to come up with the tagline of what's the fish hook in the eye that your customer has and how are you going to solve that pain for them? Because guess what? If you solve a real high value pain for your customer, they'll pay for it, they'll adopt it, they'll be fans of yours, and obviously somebody else is not able to react to that. There's a natural differentiation that comes versus a marginally better thing that, we make it a little slicker, a little greasier than the current situation. That can be good if you're already in play, if you're already the product. Those are the incremental little things you do, but that doesn't win new markets.
Well, John, you nailed it. One of the key things we started working on about 5-10 years ago, and why a lot of our clients enjoy working with us is what sucks for most of our clients is they hire engineers, whether it's my engineers or it's theirs, and the people aren't great and they stay for 9 months, a year and a half. And it's like, what sucks? Well, I just invested all this time, effort, money. As soon as I ramped this person up, they're so good, they went somewhere else. And some of that is on them, right? But for us, what we figured out is what sucks is it's not worth the investment if someone's only going to stay a year. So we figured out, forget technical skills, we got that covered. Forget even culture. Let's find alignment. Because if we can find alignment, they will stay and grow.
And my guess is that alignment is partially finding a high value problem that the customer needs solved. And guess what? Great people like to solve real problems. They don't like to just do trivial work and everything, right? So that alignment, my guess is has value for both the client. Hey, we work on high value problems, and that's a selling point to your team, which is, guess what? You're going to do things that matter. You're not going to be just doing little incremental things. And that's one of the reasons why I love what I get to do. So I do keynote speaking and I do advisory work. And I'm fortunate enough that I get to focus on real big challenges. I call them wicked problems for my clients, right? Like I don't like dealing with little minor things. There's other consultants, other advisors you can find for that. That's not my superpower. My superpower is super complex situations where there's a lot at stake and where you can create significant value. That's what I like to do. And my guess is that alignment is what you do with your client of high value problems. The clients love those, your team loves those, you've got alignment.
Absolutely. John, speaking of finding a very juicy problem, how do you help HireCloud get so big and strong like Amazon, where we have monopoly lawsuits?
I think that there's a few features that never go out of style. Faster, better, cheaper. Right? Like kind of, it's hard to find a situation where if you did it faster, better, and cheaper, that it's not a better situation. So I always think about those three durable customer needs. And so the way that you create a monopoly is you create a system, approach, a playbook where you deliver better, faster, higher quality, cheaper or more low risk delivery for your clients. And if you do that, you don't have to worry about the competition. Clients are going to find you because it's tough to find a service provider that does all three of those things. Most products or service providers, they're either better, they're either faster, or they're cheaper. But it's one of those three things, not all three of those things.
John, what do you say to the concept of you can only have two of these? It could be faster and cheaper, but not better. You could have faster and better, but not cheaper.
That's a project planning constraint, right? Like that's where you typically hear that is like, hey, you can give me two things. You can give me scope and time, but you can't tell me budget, right? Or you can tell me budget and scope, and I'm going to give you time. And so that's where I've heard those. But what I would say to that is maybe you're right. Maybe you can only have 2 out of 3. But have you really thought it through? Like, what would have to be true in order to have all 3? That's where true innovation comes from, is coming from a problem statement that appears to be a riddle, right? Like, yeah, you can't do all 3 of those things. Maybe.
I got it. John, for folks, for leaders, specifically tech leaders or executives at a high level enough position, what is the first step they should take to start thinking more strategically and starting to make big bets in their organizations?
Well, I think it's through education and really understanding the problem that the business is truly facing, right? Like big bets are typically in response to a problem that a company is having, right? We're not retaining customers. We're losing customers. We're our margin is decreasing. Those things are signals that you need to change, probably pretty dramatically. And so big bets come from a trigger that says we need to compete differently. How do we do that? And so technology leaders, I think, have both a tremendous opportunity and a tremendous obligation to be more and more the strategic and change leader within their businesses. And that's what we give them, is a set of tools to do that part of their job, which is way beyond probably the functional expertise that they have and why they got hired. But it's so needed in companies, both the strategy approach and the change leadership approach that's needed to be successful at it. And again, like that's why we wrote Big Bet Leadership. But, I would be thinking about like, why aren't we winning more? That's where I would start to be curious as a technology leader. And how do we create a high value hypothesis on that would change that problem? One of the books that really influenced me is a book called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. And it fundamentally kind of debunks, most planning and strategy. And what he says, the author, Richard Rumal, is like, good strategy is formulated off of solving a real problem in the business. And that's what I fundamentally believe in, is problem-based strategy versus, kind of like essentially year over year planning, which is confused oftentimes with strategy.
Nice. How do leaders maintain a balance between leveraging emerging tech? AI is the new thing right now that's obvious, that we're all grappling with. Balancing that without that versus hype that don't align with our businesses. Because you're so tempted to jump in and and get involved with everything, but you got to run a business, right?
You probably don't remember the last piece of advice that we give in Big Bet Leadership. The last piece of advice we give in Big Bet Leadership, in the conclusion, is to be an active skeptic. Both of those words are important. Active means you engage, right? You learn, you test, you figure things out. But skeptic means you don't fall for the hype, right? Like you approach it from a skeptical standpoint. A scientist is a skeptic. That's what a scientist is. An experimenter is a skeptic. I have to prove things out. So you need to do both of those things. Be active and be a skeptic. You have to be an active skeptic. You can't just wait, but you also can't commit big before proving things out. You have to be an active skeptic. That's the job that needs to be done in so many organizations.
One of the best questions I've heard over the last couple months is I was doing like a three man like meeting. We all run businesses, and the gentleman, my friend, asks such a good question. He says, "Hey, here's my plan. Why do you think my plan will fail?" It was such a good question. The other guy said, "No, it seems like you've got it figured out." But because he had phrased it in such a way where my job in that moment was to find what was wrong with his strategy, I hit him exactly what I was thinking, and he said, "That's exactly what I thought. I'm not going to go for it." I mean, that was such a poignant, smart question, though. It's like, here's my plan. What's wrong with it?
The thing that most people get wrong relative to planning is they plan for, although they may be agile methodology, it truly is like this climbing a mountain metaphor. We start at the bottom, we get to the middle, then we go to the top. The problem is most of the high risk components you can't figure out until you get to the top. And so the third critical habit of Big Bet Leadership is they accelerate risk and value. What that is all about is figuring out how do you flip the script. And so you take a plan and you say, well, what are the high risk, high value assumptions that you're making relative to that plan? How do we bring those forward and get better clarity on them, test them out, refine them a bit so that if there's problems with the plan, at least we figure out, we find them early. And that is a different way to approach the planning process, which is fundamentally a risk-based test approach, or just true agility put into practice in your plan, in your business planning approach. Most companies get that completely wrong. And guess what? It works when you're doing incremental things, right? Next year is going to be like last year. I can forecast it. I can budget it. Great, no need. But a big bet is new and different, right? A growth strategy, a transformation strategy, an AI strategy, you can't predict how it's going to work. Therefore, your plan is built off a set of false assumptions that you're stating as facts. What you need to do is actually recognize the fundamental thing that's different, which is this is a bet. We don't know for sure if it's going to work. What do? We bring those risks forward. We figure out a way to test them. That way we can be successful at it.
This reminds me of card counting. I don't know if you know how to card count.
I don't know how to card count. I am not Rain Man. But
well, you don't have to be. We had MIT Mike teach us how to actually count cards, and it actually wasn't difficult at all. What's difficult is when you get there, everything's out the window. Everything you heard is like, you just count. It's a +1, +2, -1, +2, and no distractions, no drinking. Then someone offers you a drink. You're like, yeah, I'll have one. And then someone's like, hey, man, where are you from? And next thing you know, you're like, where am I? And the whole thing goes out the window. John, one thing you talked about is almost like finding the red flag early. We call it here, blow it up early. And we actually use it with hiring. We do it with hiring. And when we don't follow our gut and we skip past that one red flag, the person doesn't work out 95% of the time because of that one small red flag that we saw. We're not dumb. We saw it and we decided, yeah, but no one's perfect. But really, had we just obsessed over that one issue, it would have probably blown up early, and we would have passed on that individual, saving ourselves time and money and resources and effort and all this stuff. Isn't that interesting? It's the same thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, we call it blow it up early.
Well, I wrote a book called Think Like Amazon, 50 and a half Ideas. One of the concepts from Amazon that can help in that situation is a process called the bar raiser process, right? And the problem you make in hiring is like, having that button seat is money for you, right? Like, you've got a job, you need to get it done, or you've got a need, you need to get it filled. And what a bar raiser is at Amazon is it's somebody that's independent of the hiring team. So there's a degree of independence, and they're specifically trained for that job category to evaluate that person. Is that person going to raise the bar relative to the general category of skills? And having that independent interviewer that has veto power. It's not by consensus, it's by veto power. If the bar raiser says no, that person doesn't proceed, no matter what the hiring manager says, right? And so that's a good example of recognizing in your business, a risk in your business. How do we create culture that recognizes that, and a mechanism that helps create a degree of independence in the point of view? And so much of this is about having a little bit of a degree of independence in a situation, right? Whether it's hiring or pressure testing a big bet. I get a lot of what I do. I had a partner at my prior firm who used to say to me, he goes, John, you walk a delicate line between being an insultant versus being a consultant and everything, right? Because so much of my job is about bringing an independent point of view to a situation for my client. Guess what the easiest thing for a consultant to do in that case? Well, tell them what the client wants to hear, right? The team loves it. Guess what? The consultant loves it. What is hard to do is actually deliver them an independent idea that delivers them something of value and truth and independent opinion, but also you don't blow yourself up in that case, right? And so there's an art to that. But in a lot of my work is being that independent voice that sees things through clear eyes, doesn't have all the pressures upon them. I don't suffer from sunk cost fallacy. So many situations, so many big bets that I've done reviews of, there's so much sunk costs, the team can't possibly actually evaluate killing that situation. We wrote a whole chapter in this book called Kill, Pivot, Continue, or Confusion that's all about those high stakes moments. And sunk cost fallacy is one of the biggest biases you run into in these situations. So think about, in whatever way, creating an independent opinion for a situation that helps so much.
John, I have an advisor consultant. He's terrific and he's very opinionated. His name's Mark. And I love his approach because he's extremely opinionated. He'll say things like, dude, you're the most innovative company I've worked with. You're the most innovative. Can you stop for like 3 months? We just really need to. And he shoots down ideas. And this is the relationship we've built. I tell him, look, I love it and continue. But there will be times where I will just ask your advice, listen to you, and then do what I want. You cannot be offended by that, and you cannot get to a point where it's like, what is the point? Why do I even, like a parent almost, like, why do you ask me for advice if you're just going to do the opposite? As an advisor, I do the same thing for some of the startups that I invest in and advise. And it's like, look, I'm going to give you my opinion, it's strong opinion, but do what's right for your company. So I've learned with my own guy, look, don't be offended if I still do what you said not to do. But I will listen some of the time, most of the time. But I love that. He's absolutely very, very...
You're smart to have an advisor, a coach that is independent and has the ability to discern. They need to be independent of their own independence to some degree, right? And so like, what's his framework for how he thinks through things? And then the two of you have a hygiene and approach that allows him to give him input, and you have a different context in making the decision. And as long as everybody understands that, like, that's a great relationship.
Very cool. What do you see, like, what are two big mistakes that founders or leaders are making when it comes to kind of this risk-taking world?
Well, I think one of them is that they think slightly better will win. So they don't spend enough time designing, a blue ocean versus red ocean strategy, right? That's kind of category design, value propositions, and they think that slightly better will win in the market. And you're just designing a competitive situation in a low margin situation. So I think that is one that they do. And the other is that they truly haven't discerned how to create a minimally lovable product and get it to market super fast and get critical feedback. That adoption is the only metric that matters early on. And they let better be the enemy of good enough, and they don't discern what's the critical things that need to be tested early and develop a set of relationships that will allow that to be successful in a trial situation, whether it's internally or externally. And just perfection, better becomes the enemy of good enough in general, right? And so again, they create a bunch of sunk cost in getting to their first release. Man, the stakes get really high at that point, right? Versus doing it cheap, doing it dirty, doing it early, getting real feedback. That's how you engage a market early on. So not having a distinct enough value proposition and taking too long to get your first products to customers who will give you critical feedback. Those are the two mistakes, both entrepreneurial, but for enterprises also.
John, one, you mentioned bar raiser during the interview. So as I look out there, one of our core values is raise the bar. And one of the key questions we started asking ourselves internally is we would interview people and we would rate them from 1 to 4. We'd rate them a 3. And it would be like, we'd go back about how they're going to add value and I don't know, the red flags. And one person would always say, is she a bar raiser? That's the only question you ask. And you sit there and you're thinking about it. And I think Amazon has a very specific way they look at it. Is the person 50% better than that person at that level?
It's not quantified like that. But I think the mistake that you're making that I heard was rating people on a interview between a 1 and a 5. I think the safe thing for everybody to like, yeah, they're 3 or 4.
1 to 4.
Right?
1 to 4. I got rid of the 5.
1 to 4, whatever it is. The answer should be higher or no higher. That's the only response that somebody can give. And then they need to be able to defend it, right? And that's how you create accountability in the interviewing process of, would you hire this person? Yes or no? Would you not hire them? Yes or no? No rail sitting. You can't be on the fence on this, because at the end of the day, somebody has to make that call. And that's what I would steer more to, because it's human nature. They don't want to be the jerk that says no to somebody, and everything.
Well, that's why I got rid of the 5 scale, John, because what I noticed is people would do 3. It's like, look, if you hire the guy, I was a 3, man. I was whatever.
4 scale, 3 scale, make it a 2 scale. 1, yes or no. That's what you want, is a 2 scale.
Ours was 1 is a hell no, and I'll fight you not to hire this individual. 2 was like soft no. I could be convinced otherwise.
But why would you hire somebody that's a soft no?
No, you wouldn't, though. You wouldn't.
Then why have it?
Because that's one person, right? So what they're saying is, I'm a no, but if you can convince me that, okay, I'm a 3, but if you can convince me that it's a no, then it's a no. And a 4 is a hell yeah. I will fight you to hire this person, and I will put them on my team. That's how we've looked at it. It's a better approach than the 10 scale or the 5 scale, but maybe it's not as good as your 2 scale. I love it. John, what couple quick last questions. What's the best leadership advice you personally have ever received, and how has it helped your approach?
The best advice I've received has been very much for me and my tendencies, and especially when I was when my kids were young and I had a big job and was super busy, like I was optimized for speed and efficiency. And so the mistake that I would sometimes make is I wouldn't take time with my team. And so the best advice I ever got was from a partner of mine. And when he would just remind me, John, take the suboptimal time with your team. And that was really important for me to just be reminded of, like, don't always optimize for efficiency. And because that was the mistake. Now, there was good things about that tendency and everything, right? I got a lot done, but at times I needed to just be okay with being available and being sub-optimized.
It's almost, John, it's the same thing with your family. Sometimes you just have to make space. It's not about advice and being there doing anything incredible. Like with my wife, she would say, "You're going to take some time off?" I was like, "Do you want to go on a trip?" She'd say, "No, I just want to chill." And I'm like, "Why would I take time out? Like, if we're going to do it, let's go. Let's do a trip." And I've learned over the years, no, take a couple of days, staycation, just linger around and just spend time. And I didn't know that part because I'm like you. It's like every minute is filled with optimization and ideas and helping someone and helping yourself and, all that stuff and doing everything great. But sometimes you just got to be there.
As a dad or as a family member, as a friend, that's about what being present is about, right? Which is okay, so when you're spending time together, actually be present. Put the phone away, put the computer away, engage. True engagement is so critical with, your kids and your friends and your family.
And the team. I love it. John, where can people find you? You've been incredible. I've learned so much. I don't know if I rarely do this, but I got a page of notes here, which is rare.
Well, Big Bet Leadership in the Amazon Way, hardback, Kindle, really good audio versions of all the books. You can find me on LinkedIn, John Rossman, super easy, or johnrossman.com.
I would recommend the physical book just because, again, the crunchiness and the density. I couldn't find myself working out while I read this book, right? I had to sit there.
And you can testify, we created a really nice physical book, and it's a crisp book, right? It's not a huge read. It's 47,000 words. And so, we didn't suffer from TLDR, too long didn't read. And it's a very nice physical book.
Very cool. John, thank you so much for being here and for being on the show. We've learned a ton. I know I have. I'm sure the audience has as well. Appreciate you, John.
Perfect. Thanks for having me, Avitas.
Thank you. And that brings us to the end of another great episode of the Tech Leaders Playbook. I want to thank you for joining us and hope you took away some valuable insights to apply in your professional journey. Don't forget to subscribe on your preferred podcast platform so you don't miss out on the next great conversation. I promise it'll be good. If you enjoyed today's episode, we'd appreciate if you could leave us a review. Your feedback not only helps us improve, but also help others discover the podcast. Better leaders mean better working environments. Better working environments leads to happier people. Remember, a rising tide lifts all boats. I'm Avitas Santoblian, and this has been the Tech Leaders Playbook. Keep leading, keep learning, keep giving, and I'll see you on the next one. Until then, stay inspired, my friends.